Tonight, an alarming new report on Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the person Donald Trump wants to put in charge of the country's health. In May of 2021, that's just 6 months after the rollout of the COVID vaccine, Kennedy tried to stop all COVID vaccinations in the U.S., the New York Times reports. He did this during a deadly phase of the pandemic when thousands of Americans were still dying every week. Kennedy's anti-vax organization petitioned the FDA to completely revoke authorization for the vaccine and refrain from approving any other COVID vaccines in the future, even though estimates have begun to show the rapid rollout of COVID vaccines had already saved about 140,000 lives in the United States. Senator Ed Markey, Democrat of Massachusetts, is on the Health, Education, Labor Committee, which is one of the committees that will be holding hearings on RFK Jr. for Health and Human Services Secretary, and he joins me now. Senator, obviously we've known RFK's position, RFK Jr.'s position on this. This is new news that this petition actually happened. We've got global estimates that in that first year, the vaccine saved the lives of about 19 million people. What do you think this says about his qualifications to be the head of HHS?
Well, it only reinforces all of the doubts that have already existed about his candidacy. He's questioned the vaccine for polio. He's questioned the vaccine for measles. And by inference, it also is mumps and all of the other diseases in our country and around the world that in the past 2 generations, if they haven't been completely eradicated, they've just been reduced down to a dramatically lower number each year that affects families in our country and around the world. And what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has done is that he is putting a cloud over vaccines. He's allowing for doubts to be raised in families' minds as to whether or not they should be vaccinated. The COVID vaccine, if it had not actually been distributed, would have led to another 800,000 deaths in our country. And here he had a petition to stop the distribution of the vaccine. So from my perspective, this is just one further reason why 75 Nobel Prize winners have come out in opposition to Robert F. Kennedy's confirmation as the top health official in our country. And it's why this is going to be one of the most important confirmation hearings that we have had in a generation in the United States Senate.
Just to stay with this for a second, I mean, you talk about polio and other things. I mean, one of the things that's so wild to me about this is that we actually we lived through this with COVID. Like, we got to, like, people couldn't leave their homes. We were outside. It was killing thousands of people a day. And the vaccine, the country got vaccinated enough that we didn't have that anymore, more or less. So here's my question to you in a technical sense. I mean, if he were the head of HHS and we had another pandemic, which I know no one wants to think about that, but 100% could happen, like, he would have the power to do things that would stop the development of vaccines for that virus, stop the deployment. Like, he would have very real power to make it impossible to vaccinate people, right?
I'm not predicting this, but if for the sake of this discussion, there was a bird flu pandemic that broke out in our country, and we needed a vaccine, and we needed it to be distributed, we would need a secretary of HHS that was leading the charge.
Yes.
That was out in front and recommending to people, especially those who might be in the most vulnerable communities, that they take the vaccine. And instead, based upon his past history, I think it's pretty clear that he would not be doing that. In fact, he'd be raising questions about the safety and efficacy of that vaccine, which would be very dangerous to the communities which could be potentially threatened.
That petition we mentioned before claimed the risks of the vaccines outweighed the benefits, that vaccines weren't necessary because good treatments were available, including ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, which subsequently, through multiple studies, has shown to be not at all effective at all. And they had already been deemed ineffective against the virus at the time in 2021. There's been subsequent data, so this is just essentially nonsense. Yeah, go ahead.
I said he's moving us away from acceptance of vaccines, acceptance of fluoridation as a part of the healthcare culture in our country. And by the way, distracting us from what the real agenda of the Republican Party is, which is to loot Medicaid, to loot the Affordable Care Act and all of the health care programs for ordinary families, for poor families in our country, to pay for the tax breaks of his billionaire buddies down in Mar-a-Lago. That's what we should be debating, not the efficacy of vaccines. And that's really at the heart of the problem of this Kennedy nomination. We are being distracted from the real issues and the real agenda of the Republican Party, once again, which is to pay for the billionaire tax cuts at the expense of the programs, especially the healthcare programs, which the Republicans have always harbored an ancient animosity towards, and to then use that money for the tax breaks for the rich. So it's just absolutely the oldest Republican playbook. And unfortunately, Robert F. Kennedy not only helps to distract from that agenda, but he also advances a dangerous agenda for our country, which would further endanger the health of ordinary families.
Senator Ed Markey of the state of Massachusetts, thank you so much for your time tonight.
No, great to be with you.